Today we are going to present biometrics and fingerprinting. Our research question is, how can advancements in fingerprinting the human body impact the accuracy and efficiency of fingerprint classification and verification using biometrics?
In order to understand this question, we're going to be going over the history of fingerprinting and biometrics throughout human civilization. And humans have been, for a long time, using art and a means to copy down parts of themselves as part of their identity, as we've seen in cave paintings where people have traced over their hands for thousands of years. And in many civilizations, this practice evolved into the identification system for legal documents, which is also known as palm printing, where a person's hand is used to make impressions in clay tablets for inking of a signature in a way, as a sign of approval and authority. But this practice was widespread and not just used for authority and signatures. It was also used to record the palm prints of criminals as well, which all of this can be very found across places like China, India, and Japan. And as we know now, our understanding of ourselves has evolved. We also discovered an importance to identify ourselves.
So now we'll discuss some of the major developmental milestones in biometric fingerprinting. Around 1800 is when fingerprints start to be used for identification. This is thanks to Sir Edward Henry, a former police commissioner in India, who developed a fingerprint classification system called the Henry Classification System in order to identify criminals. He divided prints into four types: arches, loops, whorls, and composites, and you can see each unique impression type in this image on the left. His system was the original standard for identifying criminals and the foundation for modern fingerprint analysis techniques. In 1880, Henry Faulds popularizes the importance of friction-ridged skin in regards to fingerprinting within the scientific community, and he stresses its importance for individualization. Then in 1903, the US begins to use fingerprints as an investigative tool. So 1903 is when the New York Police Department, or NYPD, became one of the first police departments in the US to adopt fingerprinting for investigative purposes, and it's also when they established a fingerprint bureau. In 1924, the proper categorization of fingerprints truly begins, with the FBI taking on the duty of archiving fingerprints, and by 1971, they had successfully gathered and stored more than 200 million fingerprints. Jumping ahead into the 1990s, this is when we see technological advancements allow fingerprinting technology to expand and digital fingerprint databases to be created. Computer programs were made to organize prints digitally for record keeping, and the 1990s saw the rise of automated fingerprint identification systems, or AFIs. For example, the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, or IAFIS, that was established by the United States in the 90s.
And in today's time for modern fingerprinting, the NGI, also known as the Next Generation Identification System, in 2011, the United States transitioned to the NGI system, a cutting-edge database that integrates additional personal data with fingerprint records. This includes criminal histories, biographical information, and other identifying details, making NGI a comprehensive tool for law enforcement and forensic investigations. Fingerprinting has also evolved to live scan or electronic fingerprinting. Fingerprinting has evolved with the digital technology and advancement to adopt live scan or electronic fingerprinting. This eliminates the need for traditional ink and paper cards, streamlining data capture and integration with digital databases like NGI. And lastly, AI-powered fingerprints. AI systems have made significant strides in distinguishing between highly similar fingerprints. This technological advancement enhances forensic efficiency by speeding up the identification and matching process, leading to more effective criminal investigations and justice outcomes.
So some positive reactions we've seen to biometrics involving fingerprinting is that most Americans are still most comfortable with fingerprints, though the majority, so 74.8% are happy to use fingerprints, while only 55.6% would submit their DNA. And so generally respondents are more willing to trust medical researchers, healthcare providers, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies with biometric data. So for consumers, familiarity with digital services have grown so much during the COVID lockdown. People were just using biometrics a lot more. So they found that they were more comfortable using that as an authentication method. So some negative reactions were people were distrustful of retailers, tech companies, and advertisers using biometric data. They don't like whenever retailers use it to target customers with personal ads based off their data. And so, in the reading, Why Privacy Matters, even if you have nothing to hide, the author talks about the common response people give when asked how they feel about government gathering personal data, and how people say, I have nothing to hide, or you're only if you're doing something bad should you worry about it. So this relates to the negative reactions people have using biometrics. People are uncomfortable with companies using biometrics to gather information on them, but if they have nothing to hide, why do they care? So this response has been debunked, and we are not 100% sure what these companies are doing with our data. So it's important to maintain the little privacy we have left. And laws concerning privacy will continue to be made as biometrics advance. So some laws and policies. So right now, no Miranda warnings are necessary before fingerprinting an individual, but probable cause is needed for fingerprint biometrics. And in cases where probable cause is absent, then a warrant is needed. So states have different laws for businesses collecting biometric data. In Illinois, they require businesses to inform in writing that biometric information is being collected, and also in writing the purpose and length of time the information is being stored and used. And they must also secure written consent from the consumer. In Texas and Washington, they have similar requirements for business collecting data. So they must inform the consumer that biometric information is being collected and stored, inform the consumer of the purpose of the collection of biometric information, and they must also secure consent from the consumer. So just some past cases that have involved like biometrics. So in US, the Dionysio, so no Fourth Amendment violation. There is no Fourth Amendment violation if there's a summons for a person's fingerprints. Voice exemplars are submitted for a case. So in Perky v. Department of Motor Vehicles, the statute authorizes that the department can collect fingerprints for its internal use for authenticating the identity of driver's license applicants. And in Illinois Supreme Court, they held that a separate claim occurs under the Act each time a private entity scans or transmits an individual's biometric identifier or information in violation of Section 15B and 15D. So what this means is that each scan and transmission of any person's biometric information constitutes a violation. So an example of how this would work is, so White Castle, they were requiring its employees to scan their fingerprints to access their pay stubs and computers. And to authorize each employee's access, a third-party vendor verifies each scan. So in doing so, White Castle never gained its employees' consent. So that was a violation.
And here are the current impacts of biometrics in today's society. So fingerprint identification usability has rose in the recent years, especially in law enforcement. Fingerprint identification allows for unique patterns in an individual fingerprint to be accurately classified, which is crucial in investigations. Moreover, fingerprinting can also be used for other various sectors outside of law enforcement, such as smartphones and laptops. They now come with fingerprint scanners. However, it is important to look at the ethical considerations of fingerprinting, especially on marginalized communities. While biometric systems like fingerprint identification enhances security, it can also be used to track and monitor individuals. This violates people's rights to privacy. This is concerning for marginalized communities as they are often targeted by unjust practices. Although fingerprint identification has its benefits, we must also take a look at the ethical considerations of it.
As we've discussed in previous slides with the risks of oversurveillance and data collection, there are worries with law enforcement overusing the ability to take people's fingerprints without their consent and use it in criminal cases, and potentially ignore evidence in certain cases and use fingerprints to determine if someone has been criminally convicted before, and then use that against them without other stuff involved, which is a breach of privacy, which is also a concern for workers in the private sector if they need to have their prints taken for their jobs, because if it's required without a reason to take them, it can feel wrong to most people. There are worries about the right to privacy of people, as issues regarding fingerprint collection and storage over our identifying data.
We could all potentially be required to be fingerprinted when getting an ID, a new job, donating blood, opening bank accounts, etc., to ensure that every person's fingerprint is registered. Some potential impacts for the future can include using fingerprinting for accessibility, such as unlocking phones, computers, doors, etc., background checks, security, and other new innovative uses for reducing identity theft. Other potential trends that have been identified include the use of cards and wearables that store biometric data for contactless payments, biometric technology for patient recognition in healthcare settings, multi-factor authentication, and continuous authentication. As machine learning and artificial intelligence systems develop over time, false identifications are significantly reduced. These systems bolster the security of biometrics, detecting and eliminating threats before they can cause harm. Some current examples you may have encountered in your daily life include the palm swipe terminals in our dining halls, which are intended to prevent identity theft, touch ID, fingerprint sensors, or face ID technologies in our phones and laptops, crime scene investigations, and fingerprint sensor logins for banking apps. Biometric uses currently in development include Delta Airlines TSA face recognition software, Google Assistant voice recognition, and access to buildings and services such as our homes, schools, public transport, and blood banks. Finally, national databases can be used to identify individuals who cannot identify themselves, such as the elderly, young children, people in accidents or human trafficking situations, and those with language barriers. In conclusion, biometrics are an essential technology for improving identification and verification of humans. It can be used for a variety of purposes and consists of physiological traits such as fingerprints, palms, eyes, and faces. Biometrics have been proven to be more effective than traditional keys, ID cards, and PIN numbers, which are easier to replicate, lose, and steal, and they are much less secure. Biometric identifiers are non-transferable, reduce fraud, cannot be easily forged, and they are with you at all times, making them convenient and cost-effective. Storing biometric data makes it easier to identify people who cannot identify themselves.
Expect to see biometric systems become more reliable and efficient. We can also see biometric fingerprinting becoming the new standard for various verification processes, such as unlocking handheld cell phones to official documents. And lastly, as biometric technology advances, we should also see the ethical consideration behind it to ensure that data is being stored responsibly. Thank you.